2 weeks ago, I made a video about the tank class and how I believed that there was no true tank in the game. The video performed pretty well, so I asked myself, what's as egregious of a class, if not more? What else but the support class? In this video, I'm going to talk about what I believe a true support is, which is, of course, subjective for everyone. Then, I'm going to talk about each of the supports in Brawl Stars and how they fit in that definition, finishing off with talking about why the supports in Brawl Stars are the way they are. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to keep up with my videos. Second, join our Discord server. We have some fun stuff to do there, like our very own 1v1 ranked, called Gauntlet. Finally, consider becoming a channel member if you're interested in supporting the channel and have ample disposable income for some cool perks, like watching videos early or getting to decide on future video ideas. First off, what exactly is a support? Support characters are characters whose main purpose is to support their teammates. This can be through several ways, though first and foremost is through, of course, healing teammates. A secondary purpose is, of course, through buffing teammates and stats, such as damage, overall health, and movement speed. After those two, it gets a bit murky, but things like shielding, extra utility, and other general supporting things can be seen as traits of supports, though the big two is usually in buffing and healing teammates. As for their stats, they may vary because unlike someone like a tank or a damage dealer, the main focus isn't on their stats, it's on their impact on teammates. But most common in supports is a sort of squishy, weak, in 1v1s archetype. They usually cannot fend on their own in a 1v1 situation, and rely heavily on their teammates in those matchups, with an especially bad matchup against diving brawlers. Basically, their unique ability to support teammates in terms of healing and buffing is balanced by their inability to support themselves, relying on teammate support, leading to a symbiotic type of relationship. Though, like I said earlier, this isn't the main criteria for being a true support. With that in consideration, let's go over each of the supports in Brawl Stars and see if they meet the criteria to be a true support. First off, Poco. Poco is a bit of an interesting case. When looking at just his stats, he definitely seems like a support, albeit a tanky one. His attack damage is quite poor, and he usually relies on having teammates to support him when getting kills. However, his super is definitely his main support mechanic, allowing him to heal teammates as well as himself. What's interesting about Poco is that based on what star power you choose for him, he becomes even more of a support or even less. With Screeching Solo, his main support mechanic is no longer purely for support, and now has more of a damage or assassination purpose. However, with Da Capo, Poco becomes even more of a support, and could even be considered a bit of a true support, with him being basically fully designed around support at that point. Next, Gus. Gus's support classification comes from basically two things, his super and his ghost mechanic. There's one big problem with this, however. Both are used primarily for selfish purposes. 99% of the time, Gus's super is used on himself, and 99% of the time, Gus's ghosts get popped by Cookie Popper rather than actually healing teammates. Besides, Gus plays more like a marksman anyway, and sometimes it feels like he's just way too strong for being a support brawler. Pam now, and Pam is once again an interesting case. She does have solid support mechanics, but sometimes it does feel like she's more of a tank than a support. Her very high health, her mediocre main attack, and her healing mechanics all combine to surprisingly make her a pretty solid contender for the true tank classification of the tank video 2 weeks ago. Overall, she's definitely more of a support than Gus, but not what I would consider a true support. Very next, and he's pretty complicated. He's one of those brawlers that have their class changed based on the game mode. In Heist, he's used exclusively as a damage dealer, but in a mode like Gem Grab or Brawl Ball, you'll see him used as a support. Overall, his kit is just a blend of a bunch of classes. He seems like a bit of a thrower when you look at his main attack, and his super is very assassin-like. He's also quite squishy, but he honestly has a lot of tools to defend himself, as well as pretty solid DPS and area control. I would have to say he isn't exactly a true support, and is more of a Frankenstein of classes, whose highest percent of genetic makeup goes to the support class. Next up is Max, and she fits into the second category of the big two supporting categories, buffs, more specifically, speed buffs. However, she isn't exactly played for her support capabilities as much as for her speed capabilities, being able to dodge enemies and have a very favorable matchup against marksmen. Furthermore, while her super does contribute to her supportiveness, it's often used in solo, though her hypercharge does solve this problem. Overall, she simply isn't supportive enough to be considered a true support brawler. Next up is Byron, and this should be pretty obvious. Byron is up there when it comes to the most hated brawlers in the game, and spoiler alert, it's not because he's a great support. His main attack is extremely powerful, and like Gus, he can be considered more of a marksman than a support. Furthermore, his super is even more annoying, and is a sort of assassination tool, which is not something you want from a true support. Yes, he does have the ability to be a great support, but that's only in theory, and he's rarely played like one, as his support tools are usually used on offense, rather than for teammates. Ruff's next, and he's a bit complicated. He falls into the second of the big two categories of supports, the buffers. Ruff's overall design is pretty squishy and true support-like, with a relatively mediocre main attack, though the unload speed can be pretty deadly. But overall, he's not played for his attack. The problem with his super is it's often used primarily on only Ruffs, and teammates secondarily. However, unlike others like Byron and Gus, whose optimal gameplay is usually not as a support, Ruff's optimal gameplay is using his super on teammates, so he's definitely more of a true support than them. Next up is Gray, and he's not complicated at all. He might be even more egregious than Byron, because at least Byron has some theoretical support capabilities. All Gray has is his super, which I guess offers his team some utility, and his star power, which heals them for going through the portal. This is certainly not enough to be considered a true support, and not even enough to be considered a support in Brawl Stars in my opinion. Even worse is that Gray's super is often used solo for assassination, so if his only mechanic for supporting is being used on himself, why is he a support? Doug is next, and it's becoming increasingly clear that nearly every brawl in the support class observes a hybrid classification. Yes, he can use his super on teammates to revive them. Yes, he heals teammates with his main attack, but how many times are those two things actually used on teammates? Nowadays, his main attack is used on teammates, but I can't say the same for his super. Furthermore, he designed very similar to other tanks like Jackie and Trunk, and his ability to self-heal with his star power, deal double damage with his gadget, all contribute to his tank gameplay. To be fair, his hypercharge only really works when used on a teammate, so that's good, but overall he's more of a hybrid of a tank and a support than an actual support. Jae Young now, and he's pretty interesting. His design actually incorporates both of the big two. His first form heals teammates, and his second form increases teammate speed. He has been really broken and annoying in the meta, but I don't think that's detracting too much from his supporting classification. However, he becomes a big problem when you consider his damage gadget, which makes him into a damage machine, something a support shouldn't really be. Overall, he does have elements of being a true support, but with how he's used in-game, especially with his damage gadget, it really detracts from him actually being one. And finally, last but certainly least, Kit. If this guy is a support, Uzi isn't the greatest artist of all time, and you guys know my opinion on him. At least I hope you do. Anyways, when you look at Kit's kit, his invis gadget, his hypercharge, basically all the signs point to him being an assassin. Even in his support form, he deals even more damage, and is more like a thrower, though he does help with some great cheese. Overall, this cat is not a support, and definitely not a true support. Now that we've gone over all the brawlers in the game, let's talk about why exactly most of the support class aren't exactly true support brawlers, or even brawl supports. As you probably guessed, self-sufficiency is the biggest reason. I've talked about this a lot before, but self-sufficiency is basically the concept that every brawler should theoretically be able to beat every other brawler. This is very detrimental to having actual supports in the game, because having a real support would mean that self-sufficiency would have to go out the window, which Brawl Stars cannot afford to do. Continuing with this topic, a big problem with having true supports is the solo showdown problem. Usually in multiplayer games, there isn't a single player game mode, so you don't have to worry about making supports viable by themselves. However, this doesn't apply with Brawl Stars. Every brawler should have a chance in solo showdown, which is why we get the supports we do, so that they are theoretically viable in solo showdown. Furthermore, the random problem. In Brawl Stars, since it's a 3v3 game, the quality of each teammate has a much bigger impact, since you only have 2. This means each brawler must be able to do well by themselves and potentially be able to carry the team, to offset the potential trashness of teammates. Once again, this doesn't fit with the whole point of being a support, which is relying on teammates, but also having teammates rely on them. Overall, supports rely on extremely team-focused gameplay, which unfortunately is becoming less and less of a focus in Brawl Stars, especially as we see new broken mechanics like hypercharges that require less team play and more team wiping. Of course, there's also the problem of support brawlers' optimal gameplay not being around their support abilities. For example, Byron. His super, his triple shot gadget, and his main attack all have the potential to do great healing. Yet, more often than not, it's used to damage enemies rather than heal teammates. Gus and his 2 support mechanics are both used selfishly. Doug uses his super primarily on himself. Kit uses his super usually on enemies. I can go on, but you get the point. In Brawl Stars, with many of these double use mechanics for supports, people make the choice to use these mechanics for offense, rather than for support. Overall, it's really just a problem with Brawl Stars and their designing. There's no reason for these support brawlers to have support as a secondary purpose over damaging and assassinating enemies. However, at the same time, it's the only way these support brawlers can survive in a game like Brawl Stars. So at the end of the day, it's really a difficult thing to balance and design properly. Overall, Brawl Stars has an interesting relationship to support brawlers. While a few can be considered close to a true support, most are combinations of brawlers of other classes, and even another class entirely. However, there are good reasons for this, like self-sufficiency, solo showdown, and bad randoms. There's also bad reasons for it, like brawlers having more incentives to use their support mechanics offensively rather than defensively. But anyway, let me know what class I should cover next, and as always, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.